Hello, my name is Neil Davidson and I'm the founder of Raw Umber Studios. Welcome to another online portrait drawing session. This video mimics the structure of a regular life drawing class. We'll show you 3 photographs on the screen, one for 10 minutes, one for 20 minutes and one for 30 minutes, and it's your job to draw the photograph that you see. Lizet will be joining us. She'll be doing a demonstration in the bottom corner of the screen and giving hints and tips. Once you've finished, don't forget to post your work to Instagram and hashtag it with #RawUmberLive. Right, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome to another Raw Umber portrait session. This week I want to get a little bit more involved in shadows and shadow shapes. We spoke about shadows a little bit last week, so everyone who's new, feel free to have a look at that video after this one. But in this one I'm just going to be a little bit more specific about one particular bit, and that bit is Gestalt theory. So it's a German word. It basically means like shade or form, not really an equivalent in English. And what it basically means is that our brain has the ability to see something even though it's obscured. It can make parts into a whole. So in order to illustrate that, I'm going to show you some triangles. So the first triangle is just a normal triangle. So everyone knows it's not the best triangle I've ever drawn, but it's a triangle and that's clear. So that's just what we think of as drawing. So the second one I'm going to draw is, I'm actually not going to draw a triangle. I'm going to draw 3 circles with a pie-shaped bit out of it. And as you see, when I do that, our brains form a triangle. We can imagine a triangle sitting on top of 3 black round shapes. So that's one bit of the Gestalt theory. It's to do with continuance, meaning that we perceive something to continue even if we don't have all the information, and to do with closure. So even though something is not entirely closed, or the lines are not entirely closed, we still see that triangle. Same thing with the next one I draw. Even though I only do a few stripes, we still see that triangle there. And that same principle applies, for instance, if you got a triangle with something in front of it. We don't get confused by the shape, we still see a triangle. And finally, even if I just use a bunch of dots, our brains still connect those dots up. That's to do with proximity. So if you've got a group of things, our eyes like to group these things together into one whole. And so we still create that triangle. So this is really useful, as you can imagine, in daily life. So we don't get confused. If our friend points at something but their arm is obscured, we don't think that their arm is chopped off. So it's very, very useful. But for drawing, this is something that we have to learn to shut out, because often when you see somebody, you don't actually see everything that we know should be there. And I'm going to demonstrate that on our model today. So let's start with a 10-minute pose, and I'll get to the bit where this comes into play quite quickly. I'm going to start by just placing her on the page, top and bottom, and I'm going to find the midpoint. In this case, that is exactly the bottom of her eyes, where the lower lid starts. Next, I'm going to divide the face up into 3 thirds, which is something I use quite a lot. And it's chin to the bottom of the nose, and bottom of the nose to the brow, brow to the top of the head. In her case, her brow is a little bit lower than that, so I'll adjust that later. And one thing that I see on her is that the center line, which is the line going directly in the middle, dividing the face in halves, the width from the center line to the cheekbone is exactly the same length as that first third of the face. So nose to the bottom of the nose to the chin is the same as the center line to the cheekbone. I'm using that to make sure that I've got her width right. Okay, so I'm not going to draw a lot because I measure a lot, because I just want to get to this Gestalt bit. So I'm just going to put some really quick shadow shapes on, just for the bottom of the nose, for the top lip, and for the hairline. And I'm going to just sort of do that fan, which is the cheeks to the chin. The nose, I can measure that, is about 4 times the width of her face. So I'm just going to put that in, and that's the same rough width to her chin. Okay, so now when we're going to draw the eye, so this is something we spoke about last week as well. Instead of drawing the eye in straight away, just draw a bunch of shadow shapes. So on the side of the nose, I see a long, thin shadow shape there. And then where the brow is, that same width now angles up into the brow and then angles down again. This is to do again with that closure and continuance. We don't need to draw everything, every hair of the eyebrow for someone to understand that there's an eyebrow there. So a lot of drawing is about hinting at things and letting the viewer's brain do the work of connecting up the dots, much like they do in real life. And that's what makes drawing, that's what's going to make these drawings look more real, rather than a drawing where you just copy everything. It's actually going to look less real because that's in real life, you don't actually see everything. So for instance, if I would draw an eye like you would draw an eye, so you got the pupil and the lashes and all that stuff, it looks quite flat, it looks a little bit fake. But now if I put these shadow shapes on top, you can see that it already looks a lot more realistic. Even though there's actually less information, there's no pupil, there's no lashes. So that's the principles of Gestalt. And we're going to do that same thing on our real model. So I'm just going to put the shadow shapes in that are going to create that eye. Now we've got a rough idea of where the eye is and how it's going to look, and you can see how it already starts to look like an eye. Our brains are already connecting up the dots. Now one thing we can add on top of that is edges. So I'm going to just sort of blur areas, and what that is going to do is give our brains the hint that it's rounded. Because in real life, when light falls on an object that's rounded, it slowly falls off. So we're trying to emulate that. Then I use my rubber to take out some harder edges, and what that does is indicates that there's a sudden change. So for instance, on the lower lid, the eye doesn't actually go down rounded anymore. Actually, lower lid's more of a flat plane, so that's where there will be a harder edge. So that's already a much more realistic eye than if we draw just what the outlines of what we think we should see. Now on top of this, you can even put some darker accents, and that's going to really make it feel alive. So there we have it, a rough sort of eye that's drawn without thinking of an actual eye. And that is the principle of Gestalt, and that's what I want to talk to you about in the other two poses as well. All right, so here we are for the second pose. So I'm going to go straight in and start by adding the top and bottom on the page where I want it to be. And in this pose, we're going to take those same principles as we used in the 10-minute pose, but I'm going to try and take it a little bit further. So I'm just adding the center line. She's slightly tilted to the right, and you can see that by taking the middle of her chin to in between her eyes and seeing the angle of that. So next I'm going to find that midpoint. And after that, I'm going to divide the face up into 3/3, much like we did in the 10-minute pose. And we can take a lot of the measurements that were in the 10-minute pose and take them straight over to this one because she's pretty straight on. So for instance, the middle of her face, center line to the outside of her cheekbone is the same width as that first third of the vertical measurement. Now, last week somebody was asking about the box. So when you put a side plate in, well, if I wouldn't do that in this case, her ear, if I placed it, it would be very, very close to her face, so she doesn't have space for that. So what I usually end up doing is taking that outside of the cheekbone and I'm measuring how wide that is compared to the front face. In this case, it's pretty much 2/3 of 1/2 of the front plane of her face. And I'm putting that cross in and then putting the ear in. And then you have a good idea of where that ear should be and what the width of her head is. And it just helps a little bit. So it's sometimes hard to realize when someone's front on or when someone's slightly on the side. But I usually just take that wide spine of the cheek point as my guideline, and that helps me. Okay, so here are my guidelines all done. I've got a rough idea of the block of the heads, and I'm going to jump straight into those shadows because I want to show you a bit more about this Gestalt theory. So first, try and see things as just as in shapes. We spoke about this a little bit last week as well. So I tried to look at, for instance, on the side of her face is a little bit of an arrow shape. One of my teachers, Anastasia Pollard, she also mentioned to me, think about animal shapes. So try and see an animal in the shadows. And that really helped me as well. So for instance, that the arrow shape could be a bird flying. And if you do that, that way you disconnect yourself from what you think it should be. So you're sort of separating your brain from what we discussed in the 10-minute pose, where you think there is a triangle, even though there's really just 3 circular shapes with a gap. And that same thing happens if you make shadows into little shapes that are triangle or squares or little bird shapes. You stop thinking about that being part of a nose and you just look at the shape. And when you copy that shape correctly, a face will start to emerge. Okay, so now I've got all my shadow shapes in, and what I want to show you next is that you can also leave out a whole bunch of lines, in fact. So for instance, if I have the dark side of her face, you've got her jawline, you've got her ear and all those things, you've got that big mastoid muscle going from the ear to the pit of the neck. And if you draw all of those in, actually it pulls the focus a little bit too much and also starts looking a little bit drawn. So what happens if I just erase all of them? So if I just get rid of the lines, but instead make sure that the outside edge of that shadow is very indicative of the jawline and the neck, then our eyes fill in all those lines that we've just left out. And the same thing goes for the light side of the face. So actually we don't need a line around all of the light side of the face. I can erase quite a lot. And if I just have that indication at the jawline, at the bottom of the ear, our brains connect the dots and imagine a line all along the outside. Same thing goes for the nose. You see in the shadow there's a lot of nostril and side of the nose and that sort of thing. But actually we don't need all of that. If we just put in the nostril on the light side of the nose, then our brains will sort of imagine there's a nostril on the other side and it won't actually need that much information. So it's a little bit like telling a story. If you've got a detective book or something and you write down the butler did it, it's not very exciting. But if you sort of hint at stuff and you let the viewer engage with it, it makes the drawing a little bit more interesting to look at, and also, weirdly enough, more realistic. Okay, so as a final example, I'm going to show you the eye, and it's exactly the same as we did in the nose. I'm just going to put the absolute minimum on. I'm going to start by doing some shadow shapes and then put some accents where I see some hard edges in that shadow and get rid of as much detail in the light and in the darks. And hopefully we'll be able to see an eye. Okay, so that's the end of the 20-minute pose. I wish I could have drawn a little bit longer because I was having so much fun, but I will see you in the 30-minute pose. Here we are for the 30-minute pose, and I'm basically going to do exactly the same as I did for the 20-minute pose, but now a little bit more involved and a little bit longer. So let's get started. And as usual, I am gonna start with the top and bottom of the head, placing it on the page where I want it to be. Next, I'm gonna put in a center line, and as you can see between the tilt of the chin and where her eyes are, you can see that slightly tilted to the left. Next, I find that midpoint and divide the face up into 3 thirds. In this case, I'm going to do something slightly different with center line. I'm just breaking it up where the nose is, so it goes more vertical towards the nose and then more tilted towards the forehead. I know we spoke about the lip to the chin being the same as the side of the face, but because she's turned away, that side that will turn away will be less visible. So I sort of try to measure that a little bit more differently. So the side of the box, I spoke about that a little bit last week, but basically what you do is you take the outside of her cheekbone, that's the side of the front box, the front plane of the box, and then look at the line from the corner of her eye to the hole of her ear. That's the angle of the side plane of the box. Then next I just need to put a cross in and make sure that the ear is between the brow and the nose. So approximately here. Then there's the two mastoid muscles. And because I'm focusing on Gestalt and tones this week, I'm going to go straight into the shadow shapes again. And like I said in the 20-minute post, just first think about triangles, shapes, pyramids, animal shapes, whatever helps you to see those shadow shapes, and just put those in without regard of what you're actually drawing. When I'm putting in the eyes, a handy way to measure it is that the eyes fit in 4 times, a half on the outside, one eye, bridge of the nose on both ends. Now I'm going to put in that big shadow shape of the hair. Again, not really figuring anything out in the hair or in the shadow, just thinking it's one big shape and leaving it at that. Okay, so now I've got all my guidelines in and my big shadows. Now what I'm going to do is start refining and also removing any lines that I don't need and adding sharper lines when I do need them. So like we were speaking about in the last poses, you don't actually need that much information for your brain to connect up the dots. So what I'm going to try and do is put in the bare minimum. So for instance, with the jaw, there is a very sharp edge on the outside of our chin. So what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of an accent there and then sort of smudge out the rest of the shadow. And then just sort of hint at the outside of our heads and erase the rest of that line. And as you can see, when I do that, we don't actually miss the outside of her head that much. We sort of understand what's going on even without that. So that's what I'm going to try throughout the whole picture. So the same thing with the lips. I'm going to put in darker accents where I see them, darker and sharper accents, and then remove any lines in the lights that I don't think I'm going to need. And again, try to work with the absolute minimum amount of information and see how little you need really to create a face. Same thing with the nose. I'm not even going to put the nostrils in. Just going to put in the sharp edges where they are and soft where they should be soft, and then leave it alone. With the eyes, there's a little bit more of a complication going on. The top lid casts a shadow, it actually turns down, and the lower lid also turns round with the roundness of the eyeball. So you've got a bit of a half tone, a softer tone below the eyeball, and quite a sharp shadow on the top there. And because she's looking to the top left, her lid will follow her iris, so it will also be highest on the top left corner. So as you can see, we've got a little bit of an image of the eyes already, even without having anything in them. But what I'm going to do next is put the iris in and the pupil. So keeping everything as flat as possible, just thinking about shapes, try to draw the absolute minimum in order for our brains to connect up the dots. Okay, so I have run out of time, unfortunately, but I always think this is such a fun way to work. So let me know if you'd love another lesson on this. I'd happily give one to you. Or if you have any other suggestions, that's great as well. In the meantime, don't forget to tag your stuff using the hashtag #RawAmberLive on Instagram. And also for people who are interested, I am planning to do a shadow shape themed figure drawing the week after next one. So hopefully see you there as well.
Thank you for taking part. Don't forget to photograph your work and post it on Instagram and hashtag it with hashtag #RawAmberLive. I'd like to thank Lizet Dingemans for drawing along with us today, and you can download the photographs you've seen in this week's session from the link I'm about to show you on the screen. We run portrait drawing sessions every Sunday at 2 p.m. and figure drawing sessions every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Next week we have a guest artist. Scott Eaton will be drawing from his Bodies in Motion library.